guys, Arleesha here and welcome to another video. Today I want to walk you through my portrait painting process from the beginning concept sketch through to the final finished painting. Please excuse the presence of all these little dudes over here. I was sitting on the floor with a blanket, a bunch of pillows, and a pile of anxiety, and doodling these guys was actually really helpful, and now I'm strongly considering getting them printed on some socks and sending them to all my friends as Christmas presents. To get started, I'm going to be doing a little concept sketch here. I like to work in pen or marker in my sketchbook a lot because it's permanent. It kind of forces me to make decisions, and I can't fuss over making each sketch perfect. If it's not right, I can just move on to the next one. While I'm doodling away here and getting my mind and my hands warmed up for the painting to come, I want to talk a bit about Skillshare, the sponsor of this video. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you my 4-step process for watercolor portraits, but this is just my process. What if I wanted to learn about how Sarah Anderson creates her amazing webcomics, or about how Marco Bucci does digital brushwork? I've also been really interested in how Yuko Shimizu does her amazing ink illustrations. I can learn directly from all of these professionals on Skillshare. These, as well as over 30,000 other classes, are available on the platform, and for over 2.5 years now, I have been both a teacher and a student on Skillshare. I've learned so much, not just about art and illustration, but also about business and entrepreneurial things and how to run an online web shop. There's just so much there, and an annual premium membership comes out to less than $10 a month. If you're not sure and you want to check it out, there's a link down in the description to try 2 months of premium membership for free. So you can check it out, see if you like it, and give my classes as well as so many others a try. One of my favorite things about sketching with these particular markers, these are the Pentel Touch markers and they're water soluble, is that I can reactivate the ink with water to create some loose washes for value sketches. This is really handy in my sketchbook, and when it comes to the overall process of making a portrait, getting my mind prepared to loosen up and just create lots of marks and smear color all over the place is always a nice way to start, in hopes of eliminating that fear of putting color down or worrying about messing things up. If I can start to kind of break that down while I'm still in my sketchbook, I'll be able to be a lot more expressive when it comes time to actually paint my portrait. For this painting, I'm mostly using this reference here that I found on Pinterest. I'm using this mostly to help me get some of the structures of the head right, and I also liked this pose and some of the values happening here. As you'll see, the final piece is going to look a lot different from the reference you're looking at. Having a really solid foundational sketch is an essential first step. If I'm not happy with the sketch that I've made, I won't be happy with whatever I paint on top of it. I know I've talked about that a little bit before. Most of the things I'll be talking about in this video, you may have already heard scattered throughout some of the videos I've made in the past, but my goal today is to have all of that information in one place and to outline my painting process in a way that I haven't before. I've broken down the overall process into 4 steps, the first of which being atmosphere. So in the beginning of my paintings, I want to jump in with loose color all over the place and create atmosphere. In this piece, that starts with laying a colorful gradient over the neck, as well as putting some base color down for the side of the face that's in shadow, and putting down a first layer for the background. By covering a bunch of the area in color right away, it helps me to start loose and not jump into the details too quickly. If I was to jump right into painting one of these eyes, for example, I might be immediately overwhelmed by putting too much detail into that one area, which would cause me to work really hard to make the rest of the painting match that one eye, which is not a process that I really enjoy, trying to constantly make the rest of the painting match up to one particular area. It helps me to start thinking loosely right away, and it helps me to establish an overall atmosphere for the piece, which is really my preference. I like to have a general atmospheric goal for a painting, and then work to have all of the individual elements align with that atmosphere. So while this initial part may only take 5 to 10 minutes to lay in the initial wash, it's really crucial to having a piece that I enjoy the emotion or atmosphere or mood of when it's all done. I'm also laying down the framework for the color scheme at this part. This one in the end is going to have a sort of rainbow of colors, but there will be a lot of areas where I'll fall back on a sort of sunset gradient of yellow, orange, red, and purple. And getting that structure down now in the very beginning helps me to make that more of a consistent and common theme throughout the entire piece. This is definitely the step where I cover the largest amount of area in the shortest amount of time, so I'm kind of working in the widest part of the paper now, and then as I continue, I'll become more and more focused on particular areas until the very end, which you'll see. Once that initial wash is in, and I've got that atmosphere established, the next step for me is anchoring. Anchoring is the process of adding some deeper, darker values to areas of focus or areas with greater contrast. In a portrait, this is often the eyes, and also sometimes the nostrils can be very dark, as well as the creases of the lips. Where the two lips meet one another, we can see some darker values in the eyelids and the eye sockets, as well as under the neck and within the ear. So anchoring is the process of adding in some of those darker values and the first touches of structure so that my portrait feels more grounded and I can build out from these anchor points. I'm still working to include a lot of color at this point, and when I work with color, I'm largely thinking in terms of color temperature, so I wanted the eye to overall feel very warm. So we've got lots of red, yellow, oranges, again, carrying over that atmosphere from some of the things we did in the last step. And then I can just work in shifts of those warmer hues in particular areas. So when working in the deeper shadows of the eye socket, just between the eye and the eyebrow, I want that deepest area to be a bit cooler, so I'll make that a bit more purple. And then again, like we've done before in other areas, I can work in that gradient. So starting with the purple in the deepest part, and working that out to something a bit warmer and a bit softer into our red and then into our yellow, and then fading that out to the white of the page for the side of the head that's catching the light a bit more. This is definitely going to be an example of a soft curve, a soft edge up there above the eye. Having a combination of hard edges and soft edges is really essential for having an organic and natural and effective and interesting looking portrait. So an example of a hard edge would be in the direction we're facing on the right of the eye there. We've got that hard shadow line where the bridge of the nose starts to create a new plane, and we're looking at a part of the face that's catching the light as we move into the nose, while the socket of the eye is still deeper in shadow. A few more examples of the anchor points I'm going to be putting in at this step would be the darkest part of the eye, meaning the crease of the eyelid where the eyelid kind of wraps around the eyeball. Also the nostril, and again the corners of the mouth and under the chin. I may even put in some darker values in the ear at this point too. All the while keeping those colors a bit harmonious with the colors I've selected. When I'm mixing my actual colors, I'm not just going into my palette and grabbing a red and then grabbing a yellow and then grabbing a purple. As you can see from the little corner of my mixing tray over there, all of my colors are kind of getting mixed for the most part in the same area of my palette. Maybe one other well is being used too. Pretty much all of my colors will have a little bit of one another in them. So the purple will have a little bit of the same red I used, and so on. Keeping the colors as mixes of one another helps me to be more experimental overall because I'm keeping the saturation a bit lower. While the portrait overall will look really colorful when we're done with lots of different colors, there will only be maybe one color, and usually for me that's red, that's all the way up at full saturation. So most of my other colors will be a bit more diluted, a bit more desaturated, and mixed a bit more with other colors. So only here now, after atmosphere and anchors are in place, do we move into our third step, which is sculpting. This is where I focus on the details. At this point, I've got a really nice, strong foundation for my portrait, and only now am I going to jump into the smallest, finest areas. I know the direction I want the piece to go in because I established that when I was working out my atmosphere, and I made that even more concrete with my anchors. And now I'm just filling in the space in between. So oftentimes in watercolors, you'll be taught or told or hear that you work from light to dark, which would mean working in the lightest, loosest washes first, and then kind of reining in that structure as you go to get your deepest values in last. For me, I kind of work on either side and then jump into the middle. So I do start usually with my lighter washes, but then I will jump into the darkest areas to establish those anchors and to get the structure a bit more solid so I don't get lost as I move into building up the midtones and all of the things in between. And usually that involves darkening my darkest areas as I go, as the midtones start to come to life, and then the darkest values don't look as dark anymore, and I can just add extra layers on top of those darkest areas I'd already established. I like to save this detail and structure for the second to last step, as it feels more like I have an already established framework that now I'm just trying to fill in the pieces, and I can decide when the piece is done. Painting for me is a lot about how it feels to paint. If the process doesn't feel good to me, if it doesn't feel enjoyable to me, I either won't do it or I won't make a piece that I like. I'm not very good at fighting through a piece and just getting it somewhere even if I'm not sure what to do, or pushing through when I know I need to get the work done and making it happen. That doesn't work super well for me. My painting and creativity is tied very closely to my mental and emotional state, so if I'm not prepared and I'm not in the best place to create, I usually just don't create. So sometimes, like right now, I'll have a burst of pieces in like a month's time that I'm really happy with or that I feel like I'm learning a lot from, and then I'll have another month after that where I feel like I can't create anything good, and sometimes I don't create very much at all. But right now I'm kind of swinging to the other end of that, where I'm just creating lots of stuff. And basically what I'm trying to say is that the process will look different for everyone. So for me, I start with atmosphere, then anchoring, and then sculpting, which is what we're doing now before I move into the last step, which we'll talk about in a second. But your process could look very, very different. My hope with this video is not that it would necessarily be a step-by-step tutorial in how to paint a portrait, but more that it would just kind of be an insight into my process, and you can see that everyone works a little bit differently, and if you feel like the way that you are working doesn't fit into some sort of pre-established mold that other artists are doing, that's fine. And sometimes you just have to keep creating and keep trying and failing and going through those ebbs and flows to see what works for you and to see what that process looks like for you. It's going to be your own thing, and it's taken me years to get to where I am now, and I still feel like I have a lot to learn and I have a ways to go, but this is where I'm at now. This is what I've been learning now, and it's exciting. Sometimes these 4 phases will overlap a bit. So we didn't see a ton in the actual sculpting phase before I moved into now this 4th phase, which is going to actually just be going back to atmosphere. So once I've got lots of structure in and I've established my values pretty soundly, for this piece I started to feel like there wasn't a ton of looseness and there wasn't a ton of organic interest to the piece. So I jumped into my 4th step, which is atmosphere again, and I started adding looser textures. So I added some loose floral shapes and a little bit of foliage down at the bottom, dropped in some splatters of paint, and I just needed a bit more of that organic structure before I could see what the finishing touches were. Once I had more of that atmosphere established, I could see what the piece needed just to be done. So sometimes that's building in a little bit more structure or redefining the deepest, darkest areas, putting another wash over the background, making that contrast really stand out. So having the little bit of overlap between steps 3 and 4 was really important for me in this particular case. So in the end, our 4 steps are atmosphere, anchoring, sculpting, and atmosphere again. Coming back to the atmosphere of the piece at the end helps me to add those loose, almost finishing touches at the end of the piece that give the piece more energy and a bit of life and break it away from feeling a bit boring and a bit stale. And as I said, once I've got a lot of those fun, loose details in, I'll jump back into step 3, that's sculpting, and make sure the focal points are standing out strong and the structure is exactly where I want it to be. And I'm happy with my darkest darks and my lightest highlights. Trying to record this voiceover has been an excellent reminder to me as to why I don't do a ton of tutorial type videos. It's a bit difficult for me to talk about my process in a coherent and easy to follow way within the time constraints of a YouTube video. So hopefully this video hasn't been too crazy long and too crazy rambly. I mean, I'm not apologizing for being rambly because we all know that that's what happens here. If you are interested in a more structured look at things like how I actually mix colors and lay down each color one at a time, you can check out my rainbow skin class over on Skillshare. And that's the one I would recommend the most for information on this particular process. But I also have another dozen or so classes that I've taught on Skillshare about watercolors and gouache and drawing and figure drawing and all kinds of fun stuff like that. So you can have access to my class as well as literally thousands of other classes by checking out the link down in the description for 2 free months of Skillshare Premium membership. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I hope it's been at least a little bit helpful and a little bit insightful. You can find this original piece for sale up in my shop, and there will be prints available as well. I hope you're all having a fantastic day and a fantastic week, and I will see you all next time. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye-bye.